Yo, what is up guys, and welcome back to McAdie's Entertainment. I'm your host as always, Adam McGahee. I just wanted to thank you guys for helping blow this channel up like crazy. We are almost at 27,000 subscribers, which completely blows my mind. We would not be here if it wasn't for your constant comments and support. As always, you guys are the true heroes. For anyone watching my channel lately, you would have seen I had been uploading the parts of the Marvel Universe versus the Punisher comic series. This is kind of like a Marvel Zombies but not Marvel Zombie story, and anyway, it's just a great Punisher story in general, so now that the whole thing is done, I've compiled them all into one giant movie for you guys to enjoy. Before we hop into that, I just wanted to let you guys know that our superhero training program is live. Physical and mental health is very important to me and my family, so what we have done is we put together an entire training program for anyone looking to get in shape and look like your favorite movie star in the Marvel and DC comic movies. I have my own app where I'll be able to train you one-on-one and help get you in superhero shape. I'm offering free consultations, so if you're interested in checking it out, I have the consultation form in the link below. With that out of the way though, let's get on with what you came here for, and that would be the full gory story of the Marvel Universe versus the Punisher. The tale opens as we see Frank Castle's Punisher making his way through the ruins of New York City as he is being hunted by someone or something. As the man checked his surroundings, we finally see Frank's pursuer, and that would be this world's Deadpool, looking crazier than usual, where Frank remarks that this is the 33rd time that he had killed the mercenary. Hey man, those are rookie numbers, you gotta get those up. Luring his attacker into the open, we see things had played right into Castle's hands as he fired behind him, striking Deadpool right in the head, instantly ending him. For now, you know. Thinking back to all the creative ways he had already unalived the guy before, Castle thought that this time, maybe chopping the dude into bite-sized pieces just may do the trick. Frank then proceeded to Paul Allen Poor Wade, where he placed his bloodied remains into garbage bags, which he took for disposal. As he strategically buried Deadpool's desecrated parts into separate locations all across New York, we see that he was very much alone in a horrifying new world, one that was not always like this. In a flashback, we see that this world's journey to hell started with everyone's favorite wall crawler Spider-Man as he battled his longtime foe, the Rhino. In what seemed to be a standard everyday tussle in the streets between the pair, we see things begin to unravel, where Spider-Man got progressively more violent and brutal in his punches, which sent the villain hurtling through Madison Square Garden right in the middle of a nationally broadcasted hockey game. Thousands of fans would watch as Spidey would unmercifully beat the man down right in the center of the rink, where something unexpected would happen next. Once Rhino was a bloodied unconscious pulp, Peter would tear into the man's uniform and commence feeding on his flesh, screaming that this meat was all his. Seeing that the man was completely out of his mind, it took the might of the entire Fantastic Four just to take him down so they could get him into custody to see just what in the world was going on. Considering that the entire nation saw the wall crawler eat out a man's jugular on live TV, Reed Richards was publicly interviewed on their research into what could have caused such a drastic change in behavior. With the public initially believing Spider-Man to have turned into some type of zombie, we see that this was not quite the case, as Richards informed them that he was still very much alive. However, his biochemistry had been changed, altered to the point where his higher reasoning functions had been disabled. It was almost as if he had de-evolved into a primal, cannibalistic state, that of savage ancestors from thousands of years ago. All in all, he was simplified down to a literal, blood-hungry murderer. With the entire US reeling over this transformation of their favorite superhero, we would see things go from bad to worse, as more and more supers became infected with the likes of Blob, who one day just casually strolled into a Chinese restaurant and ate everyone in sight. Hey, talk about an all-you-can-eat meal, right guys? No? Sorry. As the most brilliant minds on Earth would give their insight to what they believed was happening, we would see the infection spread to normal humans as well, where we'd see a group of children go on a killing spree in a shopping mall, and even the cast of The View would randomly attack their audience members armed with knives. Even the likes of the God-fearing Daredevil would become infected, where he would go to his local church and fully consume the nuns, where he would craft a rosary out of their bloodied bones. That's honestly pretty metal. Would probably make for a sick Megadeth album cover. Society itself was unraveling, and just like Spider-Man, had went back to a more primal-like state, where even something as trivial as 2 local donut and coffee shops had banded into tribes and went to war with each other. While the surviving heroes initially tried to help save the infected, things spread so fast and the public got so violent, with even the likes of Captain America being forced to slaughter people in the city streets. The Punisher would recount that every day you'd have to make horrifying choices, as he was eventually forced to kill even Cap, and Sue Storm suffocated her own children. During this time, the former Fantastic Four member The Thing had also become infected, where he had killed countless heroes and declared himself a warlord in this new time, even crafting a throne for himself out of the bones of his victims. However, Punisher was able to take him down after nearly a year of fighting, after getting access to some high-level armor-piercing rounds. Hey, that sounds kind of far-fetched, but if anyone could kill the Thing, it's Frank, guys. He gets oh so creative and smart when it comes to, murder. With nearly everyone he knew being dead, this left Frank as one of the sole survivors of this horrifying new plague. As we come back to present day, we see Punisher burying the remains of Deadpool, where we discover that it had been 4 years since Patient Zero Spider-Man had started this decline of society. Frank was starting to lose hope that if no one came to save them by now, they never would. The next day, Castle would log into his war journal about what he'd been experiencing, even noting that he was living off nothing but protein bars and bottled water for survival. It's clearly working. You see how jacked this guy is? Vowing to track down and end the misery of each infected, Frank ventured out for this day's hunt in search of Spider-Man, the ever-elusive Patient Zero. Having evaded capture for years, Frank would see that Peter had grown over this time and was far smarter than his infected brethren, where he even came across a trap which contained a freshly slain victim on the ground and the Punisher's iconic skull logo painted on the wall. Investigating the victim's body, whom was webbed to the floor, Frank noticed that the body was still fresh and was not brutally killed like a standard infected. This was a clean knife wound, and even stranger, this victim was not infected. Puzzled by this mysterious offering sent by Spider-Man, Frank is taken to yet another flashback even further into the past, where we see just where this virus could have come from. Here we see a younger Castle who is investigating the Mafia and had been tipped off about a weapons dealing involving a project based out of the Middle East. Locating the warehouse where the deal was taking place, Frank saw the men handing off a suitcase which he initially believed to contain a portable nuke. Doing what Punisher does best, the man unloaded on the mob goons, purposefully avoiding the case to, prevent Fallout 5 from happening. However, we would see that this handoff was a fake-out, as the case itself was empty, and the Mafia was holding the true weapons in metal vials inside their jackets, which erupted when struck with Frank's armor-piercing rounds. Here we see gallons of a mysterious neon green-like liquid splash upon Castle and onto the warehouse floor. We discover that this liquid was a top-secret government serum created to aid the survivors of a nuclear attack. It would change their DNA to be suited to live and thrive in a contaminated environment. They'd be able to breathe polluted or irradiated air without harm, and could eat anything from rotted meat to cardboard for nutrition without worry of getting sick or poisoned. That is actually super helpful. Hey, Todd Howard, can we get this stuff in Fallout 5, speaking of that, please? Being hit with a full concentrated dose of the stuff, Frank recounts that he immediately puked all over the warehouse grounds and was sick for quite some time. But after these symptoms passed, he was never sick again, not even getting the common cold. During the later days of the infection, Hank McCoy from the X-Men would study Frank's biology and realize that it was likely due to this chemical exposure that likely prevented him from becoming infected with this virus. However, it was the actions of the Punisher that caused this pandemic. For on this very day, once the chemical had come into contact with a mafia member's blood, it then leaked into the nearby sewer system, which then led to the rivers, which created an entire domino effect of this compound, impacting the entire food chain. This exposure and its effect would go unnoticed for 7 whole months, giving the population ample time to unknowingly spread this disease all over the globe. It was after these 7 months that disturbingly violent crimes would stack up, which the media initially blamed on the economy and violent video games. I mean, hey, video games are always the answer for these things, right? Even coming across bodies half devoured, people were still in denial and blamed it on some kind of new serial killer. However, it was not until Spider-Man's public outburst that everyone started to realize what was going on, and it was all on a DNA level. They were all on a biological clock that was rapidly ticking towards doomsday. All thanks to Frank Castle, mind you. I mean, dude, you're awesome and all, but you know, if literally any other superhero came across this weapons deal, I don't think this would have happened the way it did. Honestly, I think even Deadpool would have been more careful. And that's really saying something. Finger pointing aside though, there was nothing that could be done now. The Punisher was the sole surviving hero of this global pandemic. Thinking back to the body from before, Frank knew that Peter left this for him intentionally. There were uninfected survivors out there, and whether this was a trap or not, Castle would find them and end Patient Zero once and for all. Loading up his weapons, the Punisher prepared for this mission, as we look over countless heads all on pikes. Heads of the infected supers he had already slain. He knew that this was all his fault, and would now do everything in his power to save this fallen world. The next issue opens where we see Frank Castle in the middle of an intense battle amidst the cannibal apocalypse. His opponent, the infected and starving Savage Hulk, who is out to make the Punisher his next meal. As he evaded the attacks of his relentless pursuer, he thought back to when Wolverine battled the creature during the early days of the infection. Having nearly taken the monster out, the key word here being nearly, as Hulk had managed to overpower the seemingly indestructible man, where he completely devoured him. Dude, can you imagine how explosive that trip to the bathroom was after eating a dude with a metal skeleton? Now Hulk knows what perhaps a fraction of what eating Taco Bell feels like. Knowing that nothing was indestructible, Punisher lured the beast right into a trap where he prepared an arrow crafted with an adamantium blade of the fallen Wolverine. Waiting until the Hulk charged at him with enough speed, Frank aimed and fired the weapon, which directly pierced the monster through his eye, going directly through his once-thought impenetrable skull. Enraged at having been attacked like this, Hulk thrashed in the streets, seeking out Frank. But alas, it was too late. This attack did irreversible damage to the giant's brain, where he collapsed to the ground dead. Once again, this is another far-fetched kill, but man, this panel is cool. Looking on at his newest prize, Castle would go to claim Hulk's head and add it to his gallery. That is, until he heard a voice calling out for help in the distance. Tracking the sound of this voice, it led him to what seemed to be an old abandoned church. Making his way inside, Frank located a hole in the center of the building where he located a priest and a young boy, survivors, finally after all this time. Not believing his eyes, Punisher lowered a rope down to get the pair out, where he heard a noise behind him. Opening fire at the shadowy figure, Frank was soon struck from behind and realized this was a trap. A trap set up by none other than this world's Venom, who was all too delighted to see the man, saying that they knew he would come if God had asked. Not sticking around to hear a monologue from the slimy spleen sucker, Frank tossed his blade into the creature's chest, where Venom laughed off the attack, saying it would not faze him, where it made him think back to the time that he ate an entire SWAT team and remarked that they were quite crunchy. Of course, this was all a methodical attack by the hunter, who said that the knife was a distraction, where he whipped out a pulse pistol from a slain Skrull and used it to cook the beast alive. Again, a kill I find very hard to believe, but still very cool. Hey man, if a standard Skrull packing heat can take out Venom in one shot, it's best that Tom Hardy stay very far away from the MCU at this point. With the priest and the boy thanking Castle for saving them, they would see that there was no time to chat, as they heard what sounded like demonic screeching all around them. Emerging from the darkness, we would see what appeared to be hundreds of infected, closing upon the men, ready to have their unholy communion. Telling the duo to run, Castle tossed several grenades at the horde, blowing a hole into the church, giving them just ample time to make their escape. As they walked, the father once again thanked the Punisher for this rescue, and told him that he, for quite some time, thought it was God's will that he never got infected with the virus. But now with Castle's arrival, he sees it as something more mundane. For whatever the reason, he and Frank were both immune. Making their way past Madison Square Park, Castle saw that something was wrong. He had come across one of the spots where he had buried Deadpool's dissected body, only to see that the grave had been dug up by someone else, with the body parts missing. Aggravated that he was going to have to kill Deadpool yet again, Castle told the men they had to move as he led them to his bunker. During their journey, the priest told Frank that he was running a soup kitchen in the Bronx when the plague had hit, sheltering and feeding countless people who had lost their jobs as a result of the rapidly declining economy. Keeping his faith and believing that things would get better, he would see that they would get much worse, as one day his kitchen was attacked by dozens of supers who brutally attacked and fed on those whom he was housing. Saving as many non-infected as he could, the priest served as the provider and protector of these people, even being forced to kill those who threatened the innocents. Man, what a Chad. This guy is Doom Guy and Jesus approved. However, as the infection spread, so many of whom the father had protected were either eaten or infected themselves, leaving only him and the boy alive. He admitted that his faith was certainly tested during this time, but he still maintained his composure and belief in the Lord, saying that this plague was certainly proof that hell exists, and if that were real, heaven must exist as well. Believing that it was God who sent Frank to save them, the Punisher, not exactly being the religious type, told him that it was pure luck that it just so happened to be there when he called for help. Still not buying it, the priest reassured Castle that it was the will of God. And despite talking like a hunter, Frank was still a good man and was human just like them. The priest would eat those words about 2 seconds later, where they would come across Frank's hideout, where he would see the dozens of heads of the infected whom he had killed over the years. Come on, man, I know it's disturbing, but it's kind of cool, right? No? Pray for me, guys? Later that night, once the priest got over Frank's unique lawn ornaments, the pair sat down to a cup of coffee, where the man told him there were indeed more survivors out there, but they were hiding, of course from the cannibal supers, and from Frank himself. Asking just why they would be hiding from him as he only killed infected, the father answered by saying that even before the infection, Punisher was pretty horrifying, and amidst these seemingly territorial tribal land wars with the supers, it presented the question, just how was Castle different from the cannibals? After serving the Punisher up with a piece of philosophical pie, he told the man that he normally did not come to this part of Manhattan, but he was checking the places that he had used as safe houses in the past. He believed that there were still survivors out there and asked Castle to help him, knowing that there was still somewhat of a soul inside of him. Before they could finish their conversation, the pair heard a similar voice behind them, which asked dear old Frankie if he could come out to play. Knowing this was the revived Deadpool out for blood, Frank told the priest to stay and protect the child, where he went out to confront the mercenary. Making his way outside, Castle would see this indeed was Deadpool, who certainly had seen better days, and asked the dude if he were down for a little chat. Not letting the dude finish his sentence of 100 synonyms on what a chat is, Castle unloaded on the man, who literally waved a white underwear flag of surrender, saying that he was not here to fight. Shooting the man all the way down a hill, Punisher prepared to blow Wade's brains out for the 34th time, where the merc told him that he was a mere messenger sent by a higher power. Giving the man 2 words before he pulled the trigger, Wade got right to the point, telling Castle there were indeed more survivors. Holding off on ending the dude, at least for now, Punisher kept up with the religious themes of this episode and more or less crucified Deadpool to a table where he demanded more information. Wade elaborated that there was indeed a bunch of people still alive and unaffected, but as the priest said earlier, they were in hiding. He went on to say that his master knew where they were, but was leaving them alive because he came to see them as Frank's tribe. Having come to respect Frank for his warrior ways over the years, this master wanted to meet the man face to face, one tribe to another. Deadpool did not even have to give the man's name. Castle already knew who it was, the elusive Patient Zero, the infected Spider-Man. Asking just where the wall crawler was, Wade gleefully told Castle that he was already here. A horrified Castle would then look above them and see the enlarged, monstrous form of the once kind-hearted hero having the child and the priest in his webbed custody, telling the man they needed to have a talk about salvation. The next episode picks right up where the last left off, where we see Frank Castle's Punisher come face to face with the infected Spider-Man, who had both the priest and the boy in his grasp. Here we would see just how much more evolved Peter was than his fellow cannibal brothers and sisters, as he could talk in full sentences, where he told Frank that if he made one wrong move, he would drown in both the victims' blood. Not backing down, the hunter told Spider-Man that capping him was much more important than saving some random people he barely knows, where the wall crawler showed his advanced reasoning skills even further by calling Castle's bluff, telling him that if this were true, he would have already pulled the trigger. bro's been hitting logic class as much as he's been hitting the gym. While he could have easily snapped the boy's neck in seconds, we see that Parker was here neither to kill or to fight. He had a proposition, one that he needed Frank to hear. Giving the child back, Spider-Man humbled himself before Castle, who absolutely did not move his gun from his face for 1 second, and told the creature that he had 1 minute to say what he had to say. We are then taken to yet another flashback during the later days of the infection, where we see the bloody power struggles that had emerged between the infected heroes as they battled over their tribal territory, just like that of Neanderthals from years ago. Being Patient Zero, Spider-Man was much more dangerous than the others, for without his humanity, his powers were fully unleashed, making him one of the strongest and deadly warriors of this wasteland, where he even became the leader of the other spider-themed warriors of this Earth, claiming the largest parts of Manhattan for themselves. Knowing the general story of this apocalypse, Punisher urged Spidey to get on with what he had to say, where out of nowhere the wall crawler dropped some new end-of-the-world lore that Frank was not aware of. Before New York had gone completely dark, there was a huge war between 3 tribes in the middle of Brooklyn. Red Hulk's tribe, the Things, and then the uninfected resistance led by Iron Man, who sought to reclaim what was left. As each army cut each other down in a fight that lasted 3 whole days, it would appear to be a typical battle over territory. However, Spider-Man would note there was something higher at play, a more powerful force turning the infected on each other to thin out the herds on both sides of this war. It was during this great conflict that Iron Man engaged and killed Red Hulk. However, despite having a climate-controlled suit, he still managed to contract the disease, which then activated a failsafe within his body, which then fried him from the inside out, where he was locked in his armor and screamed for 5 whole days before he died. Tony then remained frozen in place and made for a sick new statue for birds to poop on. This death is clearly Five Nights at Freddy's coded. Within a matter of months, this higher power, dubbed the King of Death, had managed to wipe out most of the other tribes, forcefully adding the survivors to his army and killing those who refused. His militia grew to the point where he had managed to kill a large amount of Spider-Man's tribe while he was out hunting, and to add insult to injury, he took something from Peter. He took his mate, which he held dear. With Frank asking just why he should care about the beefy cannibal's kidnapped cave babe, Spider-Man told him there were many more survivors, and he knew exactly where they were. Just then, Deadpool managed to escape his mock crucifixion torture table Frank had pinned him on, and once again asked not to shoot the messenger, where Frank, of course, shot and killed him again. Poor guy. Between him and Deadpool, the apocalypse is just not too kind to our boy. With 2D Ryan Reynolds a smoking husk on the ground, Castle went over the plan. Kill this King of Death, and then he would be able to save the uninfected. Being wise to proposals from villains, though, he asked Spider-Man just what would stop him and his army from turning them into raw chipotle once this was all over. However, we would see there was more honor to this Spider-Man than we realized, where he corrected Frank. The plan was, he'd kill this king, and most importantly, save his mate. Manhattan would be Peter's to rule, and the rest of the world would belong to Frank and the survivors. There would be no more war, no one left to punish. For once, there would be peace on this forsaken world. Later on, we'd see Frank boarding up his house even more, where the priest would interrupt his COD Zombies prep session and ask if he was leaving for this mission. Frank, giving his most frank answer, then responded by saying that he never agreed to anything. Stepping up to the man, The father told Castle that he must. Otherwise, what was all this fighting for? What would be the point of all this senseless killing if no one was saved? The Punisher then told the priest that he was never cut out for this hero work, for he was and always will be nothing more than a killer. The father, knowing the times they were in, then told the man that the world had fallen into perdition, and that a killer was exactly what the world needed to save them. Moved by the priest's words, Frank loaded up on guns and went to bring some unexpected friends, which consisted, of course, the infected Deadpool, Black Widow, and Scorpion, sent by Spider-Man to aid Castle in the assault. Leading his squad of cannibals, Frank followed Spider-Man's coordinates to the enemy camp, which was a building near Ground Zero. Coming across the hideout, we would see dozens of survivors, where, just as Spider-Man said, there would be a woman amongst them, the only redhead of the group, his mate, this world's Mary Jane. With the group guarded by several powerful infected, Scorpion was eager to go in for some blood, where Punisher was actually the reasonable one for once, and said they had to play this smart. Armed with a suppressor on his rifle, Frank began taking out the infected one by one, where he admitted that this was seemingly too easy. His intuition would be correct, where he looked up and saw this was a trap, as countless infected arrived at the floor right above him. Opening fire on the armies, the gangs engaged in a bloody war that poured out into the grounds below. Dude, is that Batman choking out Scorpion? As Frank and Spider-Man's soldiers would fight tooth and nail for survival, Castle, of course, would resort to the wisest plan, and that would be bombs. Gathering a handful of grenades, Punisher would toss them into the balcony, blowing up the structure, and countless infected with it. Landing into the camp, Punisher would yell out for Mary Jane, telling her that it was time to go. With the woman asking just who in the world this guy was, Frank told her that he was sent on behalf of her boyfriend, where he came to a shocking revelation. Not only was MJ too uninfected, but she was also pregnant with this Spider-Man's child. Before Frank could fully process what he just saw, MJ told him to look out, where he was struck from behind from a powerful force. This force would be revealed as the long-awaited King of Death, this world's Wilson Fisk, the infected kingpin of crime. The final episode begins, where we see the powerful infected kingpin ruthlessly beat the Punisher, all while the survivors looked on in horror. Regretting that he took Spider-Man up on his offer to rescue the pregnant Mary Jane, Frank knew there was nothing he could do about it now, and had to complete his mission. Tossing his knife into the mob boss's arm, Castle took advantage of this brief opening by tossing a pair of flash grenades towards the infected, giving the survivors time to escape. As Castle led the party away, he was suddenly attacked by the crazed and infected Sauron, better known as the random pterodactyl from the Spider-Man meme who would rather turn people into dinosaurs than cure cancer. I mean, it's a goal, right? Some people don't even have those. As Castle went in to give the Barney reject a taste of some serrated steel, the dino proved he was tougher than he looked by kicking the Punisher right into a brick wall, knocking him out cold. Meanwhile, things would cut back to Castle's bunker, where we'd see the boy and the priest from before, where the child would tell the man that they could not stay there, and needed to help the one who saved them. The father would then remark that they were not heroes, and wondered just how they could do anything, where the panel would conveniently display the entire military depot's worth of guns and ammo nearby. Being taken back to Castle, we would see the Zack Snyder religious symbols continue even further, where Frank was strung up to a wooden table where Kingpin prepared to torture him. Readying his heated blade, Fisk demanded for Frank to tell him where Spider-Man was, only for the defiant Castle to spit in the man's face, where he disgustingly then licked up the tasty bro spit, saying that he was ready to enjoy what happened next. Later on, we would see the battered and bloodied body of the Punisher, who swore that he would never give in. While he'd love nothing more than to give up Spidey's location and have him and Fisk tear each other apart, Spider-Man knew where the remaining survivors were, and Frank could not risk that information falling into Wilson's hands. Besides, there was no amount of torture that Frank could go through that he had not already experienced in his body and mind, for every day he would relive the horrific death of his family, the death that would shape him into the weapon that he is today. We would then see the boy, armed with a hockey stick, and a rather ridiculous priest carrying an entire bag of guns as they made their way to the enemy camp. Sneaking inside, the pair thought they may have just gotten the jump on the cannibals, where they were immediately caught and thrown into confinement. Coming back to Fisk, we see him continue to slice into Punisher's flesh, remarking that he admired Frank's willpower, but would get his answers, one way or another. Being as cruel and relentless as ever, Kingpin turned his gaze to the pregnant Mary Jane, then decided that if Punisher would not give up the information to save his own life, would he be willing to talk if it meant saving the life of one of his own? Showing that she was absolutely no slouch, this world's MJ then proceeded to elbow Tombstone right in the face, where she grabbed his knife and pleaded with Frank not to say anything, otherwise she would end herself and her unborn child. We are then taken to the facility's prison, where we would see a healed and rather depressed Deadpool, where he was locked in a cell guarded by an infected Red Skull. Regretting that he picked a name like Deadpool for his moniker, the mercenary would then unrelentingly verbally assault poor Red Skull, who told him to shut up, otherwise he'd eat him. Luring the dude right toward the cell bars, Red Skull played right into Deadpool's hands, where the man karate chopped him right in the throat and went to make his escape. Bet he did not see that coming, am I right? Sorry guys, I had to. Things then returned to Fisk, who was totally unfazed by Mary Jane's bluff, telling her that if she was going to self-delete, she should do it now or never. The warlord went on saying that she and her baby would make for a delicious dinner for him and his men, and they would still inevitably track Peter down, where they would defeat and consume him as well. Snatching the knife from her hands, Kingpin led MJ back to camp as the escaped Deadpool would watch on. Debating on what to do, Wade thought back to the days when he was a hero and what he would have done in a situation like this. Now armed with a big bag of guns so graciously door-dashed by the priest, Deadpool remembered exactly what he would do, and that would be kick the snot out of people, where he unmercifully beat up poor Tombstone, sending him hurtling atop poor Iceman, which broke his back. Man, it is just not this dude's day. Leaping into the fray, Wade engaged Kingpin's armies, while MJ grabbed another knife from the bag, which she used to free Punisher. Gleefully reunited with his hot-leaded therapy tools, Castle told MJ to get out of sight. He then called out to Deadpool and the rest, where he tossed out even more grenades in their direction, with Wade saying that he would never team up with Punisher again. In a fiery explosion, Castle emerged like a newborn creature of vengeance, mowing down every superpowered infected in his sight, all while a horrified Mary Jane would look on at the monster she had unleashed. As the dust settled, we would see there was nothing left of Kingpin's forces other than a bloodied mess of bones and organs. With a wounded breath,
The still living Fisk would tell Castle that he knew what this was all about. He believed Frank wanted him to beg. But alas, with a sudden gunshot, Frank would prove the man wrong. All he wanted was to destroy each and every single one of these infected vermin. Later on, we would see Peter and Mary Jane reunite, where Spider-Man would keep his end of the bargain and bring the survivors to Frank. Overjoyed to be back with her husband, MJ thanked Frank for saving her, where out of nowhere, Frank would push the woman aside and with one final gunshot, the life of the once famed hero, Spider-Man, was no more. Horrified at the events he just witnessed, the priest demanded to know why Frank did this to the man who kept his end of the bargain. The Punisher responded by coldly saying that he did not make deals with monsters. Looking on at the bloodied corpse of the wall crawler, the father retorted, telling the killer that the true monster here was Frank. Sending the survivors away from Manhattan, Castle would watch on as they sailed away, saying this was not a place for the weak. This was a place for men like him. A place for killers and monsters.